in the heart of Montana's frozen mountains, where winter bites harder than hunger and silence weighs heavier than sorrow, an 8-year-old boy picked up his father's hammer and refused to let his mother die in the cold. His name was Jacob Mason, and what he built in those mountains wasn't just a cabin. It was proof that love, no matter how small, can hold back the storm. The cabin stood alone against a gray Montana sky, its timbers scarred by wind and time. Inside, Jacob Mason pressed a trembling hand to his mother's forehead, feeling the fever burn hotter than the fire sputtering in their stove. Every cough that shook her frail frame echoed through the hollow walls, bouncing off cracks his father once sealed with pride. Snow pressed heavy against the windows, whispering threats through the gaps. The medicine bottle sat empty. He was only 8, too young to understand death, but old enough to fear it. That night, as his mother slept fitfully beneath a patchwork quilt, Jacob crawled toward his father's old toolbox, untouched since the accident that had taken him. The lid creaked open like an old ghost sighing. Inside were tools that smelled of iron and pine, a hammer, a level, and nails dulled by age. Jacob lifted the hammer with both hands heavy but steady and whispered to the dark, "I'll fix it, Dad. I'll fix everything." And as the storm screamed outside, a boy too small for the world made a promise big enough to challenge it. By dawn, gold sunlight slipped through the gaps like shy hope. Jacob stirred beside the fire, his face smudged with ash and tears he hadn't meant to cry. He made tea with their last bit of honey and tiptoed to his mother's bedside. "Morning, Mama," he said softly, her cracked lips curved in a faint smile. "You sleep at all, sweetheart?" she whispered between coughs. "A little," he lied. Every morning, Jacob worked like a man twice his age, feeding the fire, chopping what wood he could carry, patching walls with whatever scraps he found. Their home had once been strong, built by his father's hands, a miner who'd poured his soul into every nail before fate buried him beneath a collapsed shaft 2 winters ago. Since then, the cabin had begun to fail board by board, as if grieving too. But when neighbors offered his mother a room in town for the winter, Jacob shook his head. "This is our home," he said, his voice small but unyielding. "Dad built it for us." Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Inside, a boy's defiance flickered in rhythm with the dying fire, fragile but still burning. When Jacob returned from helping old Mr. Abernathy for $2 and a handful of fishing lures, he knew something was wrong. The chimney smoke was faint, too faint. Inside, the air was cold and still. "Mama," he called, rushing in. Sarah Mason lay curled beneath every blanket they owned, her cheeks flushed with fever. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly. "Fire went out." "It's okay, Mama," Jacob said, forcing calm as he relit the stove and fetched water. He remembered how the doctor once said their home itself was killing her, too cold, too damp. He couldn't afford another visit, but he could fix this house. That night, he sat cross-legged before the fire with his father's carpentry manual open on his knees. Its pages smelled of smoke and oil, filled with sketches and notes in neat, steady handwriting. "Always understand what's broken before you try to fix it." Jacob traced those words with his finger. The wind howled louder, rattling the roof, but inside his young mind built a plan. He'd start with the walls, then the roof. He'd save her. "I can do this, Dad," he whispered, eyes glinting in the flicker of flame. "Just show me how." Morning came heavy with snow, but Jacob moved with quiet resolve. He opened his father's toolbox again, this time without hesitation. Each tool felt alive in his small hands, a connection to the man who'd built their world. Outside, the drifts reached his knees as he trudged around the cabin, studying its wounds. A sagging step, a warped window, a roof line bent under years of burden. He started on the steps. The first cut splintered, the saw biting unevenly through old pine. Frustration rose, but he bit it down. Then came the deep voice behind him, Mr. Erickson, the mountain's gruff neighbor. "You're holding it wrong," he said, crossing his arms. "Saw needs to start slow, let it guide you." Jacob froze but listened. Mr. Erickson didn't take the saw from him, he just showed him how. For an hour they worked in silence, man and boy, student and teacher. When the step finally fit, Jacob looked up, expecting criticism. Instead, Erickson nodded once and trudged off. That night, Jacob's mother gave him a small brass compass from her apron. "It's cracked," she said, "but it still finds north. Remember, Jacob, even broken things can point you home." He carried it in his pocket ever since. Days blurred into weeks. Jacob worked before school, after school, and sometimes through the night. His hands blistered, his back ached. But every repaired board felt like a piece of his father returning. The neighbors started noticing a pile of wood left by the door, a bundle of nails near the shed, small gifts disguised as coincidences. Jacob never asked, and they never explained. Then one morning, everything changed. Mrs. Abernathy waved a newspaper at him. Local boy rebuilds family cabin alone. His photograph stared back at him, hammer in hand, determination carved into his young face. He hadn't even known someone was watching. At first, shame burned through him. Their struggle was private. But by sunset, people began arriving. Mr. Harris, his school's shop teacher, Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife, and others with casseroles and tools. They didn't come to pity. They came to help. The cabin that once stood in isolation began to hum with life again. "Your dad would be proud," Sarah whispered from her bed, eyes shining. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob believed her. Winter turned to spring, and the Mason cabin transformed. The north wall was reinforced, the roof held firm, and the floor beneath his mother's bed no longer sagged. Jacob kept a hand-drawn calendar on the wall, blue X's for every repair finished, red circles for his mother's bad days. Slowly, the red faded, replaced by streaks of blue. Then came the letter, property taxes, 3 months overdue. One more unpaid notice, and the cabin would be taken. Panic flickered in his mother's eyes, but Jacob refused to break. He went to the Historical Society meeting in town, clutching documents proving their cabin had stood since 1897, built by his great-grandfather, one of the valley's first settlers. He spoke in a trembling voice that grew stronger with every sentence. "This cabin isn't just ours, it's part of our town's story." By the end of the meeting, the members voted to nominate it for historical preservation and pledged to help raise the funds to save it. That night, Jacob showed his mother the paper with their signatures. "Looks like we're not alone anymore," she said softly. The following weeks brought something Montana hadn't seen in years: unity. Mr. Harris's students helped repaint the cabin. Mr. Mills from the hardware store donated lumber. Mrs. Peterson and the church ladies organized a community dinner, calling it the Mason Cabin Fundraiser. The town gathered beneath string lights and laughter, the smell of casseroles mixing with pine and rain. Jacob stood by his repaired porch, overwhelmed. The boy who once worked in silence now watched his entire world come alive with sound. When the snow melted completely, the Historical Society officially recognized the Mason cabin as a landmark of resilience. A plaque would be mounted by summer. As the townspeople cheered, Jacob's mother stood beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "You did it," she whispered, but Jacob shook his head. "We did it." That night, as he sat by the fire polishing his father's old hammer, he realized something profound. The cabin wasn't a relic anymore. It was reborn, not through strength or skill alone, but through hearts that refused to stop caring. By summer, wildflowers carpeted the clearing around their home, and sunlight spilled through the repaired windows like grace itself. The cabin, once cracked and gray, now glowed honey gold in the evening light. Jacob tracked every completed task on his calendar until there was no more room for blue X's. His mother baked again, her laughter filling the rooms where silence once lived. The compass still hung by the door, its cracked glass glinting like a badge of survival. Visitors came to see the miracle cabin, but for Jacob it wasn't about fame or pity. It was about love, the kind that builds, heals, and endures. That spring, as the town held a small ceremony to unveil the historical plaque, Mr. Erickson stood beside Jacob and said quietly, "Your father would have been proud, boy." Jacob smiled. "He's here, sir, in every nail and board." When night fell, the cabin glowed warm against the mountain dark. A beacon for miles around, proof that no storm, no loss, no winter could ever bury love built strong enough to last generations. If Jacob's story moved you, remember, sometimes the smallest hands build the biggest miracles. Share this story with someone who's fighting their own winter, and remind them that broken things can still find their way home. Subscribe for more stories of courage, love, and the quiet power of hope, because somewhere out there, another fire is waiting to be lit.